I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. In fact, I didn't even know what silver looked like when I was growing up. My family lived in a small town, a place where dreams were often swallowed by the harsh reality of daily struggles. We didn't own anything fancy. Our house was modest, with peeling paint on the walls and a roof that leaked whenever it rained. We didn't take vacations or buy luxuries. Our lives revolved around getting by. Growing up, I watched my parents work hard every day. My dad worked 2 jobs, fixing cars by day and driving a delivery truck by night. My mom worked long shifts as a waitress in a diner. They both worked tirelessly, and yet the bills still piled up. They never complained, though. I remember the tired looks in their eyes, but also their unwavering determination to provide for me and my siblings. I knew that they wanted something better for us, but they just didn't know how to break out of the cycle. As a kid, I saw the families with nice cars, big houses, and exotic vacations. I wanted that. I wanted to be different. I wanted to experience a life where money wasn't a constant worry. But in my neighborhood, opportunities were few and far between. I knew that if I didn't act, I would end up like everyone else, stuck in the same situation. So, I made a choice early on. I wasn't going to let my circumstances define my future. I worked my first job at the age of 14 at a local convenience store. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I didn't mind the late-night shifts, the stacking of shelves, or even dealing with difficult customers. I learned early on that hard work was the key to success. I didn't care that I had to clean toilets or sweep the floors. I was learning the value of every dollar, and that feeling of earning something with my own 2 hands was more fulfilling than anything. During those early years, I spent countless hours reading books on business, leadership, and success. I didn't have a mentor. I had books. The entrepreneurs I read about, people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, became my mentors. Their stories gave me hope. But at the same time, they gave me a harsh reality check. I realized that success wasn't just about working hard. It was about working smart, taking calculated risks, and most importantly, believing in yourself when no one else did. One of the most significant moments in my life happened when I was 18. I remember walking through a downtown area when I saw a sign that changed everything. Diner for sale. It was a small, run-down diner that had seen better days. I had no money, but I had a dream. I asked around, trying to gather information. The owner was desperate to sell. It wasn't much, but I saw potential. I knew if I could get my hands on it, I could turn it into something. But how? I didn't have the capital to buy it outright. My savings were minimal. But I knew this was my chance. So I took a bold step. I borrowed money. It wasn't a big loan, but it was enough to get my foot in the door. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning to do. Most of the people around me thought I was crazy. "You'll never make it," they said. "You'll fail like everyone else." But I didn't care. I had a vision, and I was determined to bring it to life. When I took over the diner, I realized I was stepping into a whole new world, one that I wasn't fully prepared for. Sure, I had worked in restaurants before, but owning one was a completely different beast. It was no longer just about making a good meal and serving it quickly. This was a business, a living, breathing entity that required constant attention and strategy. Every decision I made would affect not only my future, but the future of the people I was now responsible for. The diner was in terrible shape. The walls were cracked, the tiles were chipped, and the air conditioning barely worked. The kitchen was old, and the menu was stale. Nothing special. The customers were few and far between, and the staff was disinterested. The building itself seemed to scream failure. I had no illusions about how difficult it would be, but I wasn't going to give up. I knew this was my shot, and I had to make it work. At first, I tried to overhaul everything. I redesigned the interior, giving the diner a modern touch while maintaining the cozy, nostalgic feeling it once had. I revamped the menu, adding more innovative dishes while keeping some classic favorites. But it wasn't enough. The staff didn't seem motivated, and the regulars didn't trust me yet. They weren't sure about the changes. They missed the old diner they had grown up with, and they weren't sure if I was the right person to make it thrive again. I spent days sitting at the counter, watching, observing how the customers interacted with the staff and how the staff worked with each other. I quickly realized that it wasn't just the food or the decor that needed to change. It was the culture. The team didn't feel united. There was no sense of belonging, no shared vision. Without that, no amount of new recipes or fresh paint would matter. The energy in the diner felt lifeless. I knew I had to find a way to inspire my team, to help them see that we were all in this together. But how? As I sat there one night watching the empty tables, I realized that there was something missing, a connection. Customers didn't just come for food, they came for an experience. They wanted to feel valued, wanted, respected. And my team needed to feel the same way. That's when I decided to do something bold. I wanted to experience the diner, like a customer would. I wanted to see what went on behind the scenes without the bias of ownership clouding my judgment. So I put on regular clothes, slipped in unnoticed, and ordered a meal at my own diner. I didn't want anyone to recognize me, so I kept my head low, trying to blend in with the regular crowd. I'll never forget that day. As I sat there eating my meal, I heard the shouting. At first, I thought it was just the kitchen noise, but then I realized it wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a heated argument. I looked up and saw the head chef yelling at one of the waitresses. She was visibly upset, her face red with tears. The chef was angry, berating her for a mistake that, in hindsight, was hardly a big deal. She was doing her best, but he couldn't see that. I watched in silence, my heart sinking. I could feel the tension in the air. I had worked so hard to get to this point, to make things better, and yet here I was witnessing something that could tear everything down. The restaurant's atmosphere was toxic, and I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. It was more than just bad management. It was a failure to treat people with respect. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The moment I entered, everything stopped. The chef turned to face me, his anger palpable. But when he saw me standing there, something changed. I wasn't just the owner anymore. I was a leader, someone who was willing to get my hands dirty, someone who was there for the team. I asked to speak with him privately. I didn't raise my voice, didn't make demands. I simply asked him to consider the way he spoke to his team. I told him that if we were going to succeed, we needed to build a culture of respect, understanding, and kindness. I needed him to be a mentor to his staff, not a tyrant. It was hard for him to hear, but I could tell he respected me for standing up. Then I turned to the waitress, the one who had been on the receiving end of the chef's anger. I pulled her aside and asked her what had happened. She was hesitant at first, but then she opened up. She explained that the chef had been increasingly difficult to work with, and it wasn't the first time she'd been verbally abused. Her eyes welled with tears, and I could see the emotional toll it had taken on her. I reassured her that it wasn't her fault, that she was valued, and that she had nothing to fear. This was the moment I realized that leadership wasn't about just making decisions from a boardroom. It was about stepping into the trenches, about connecting with your people and understanding what they were going through. If I wanted to lead this business, I had to be the example. I couldn't be just a figurehead. I had to be present, active, and involved in every aspect of the operation. This wasn't just a job for me, it was my life's work. I didn't stop there. I brought the entire team together, held a meeting, and laid out my vision for the diner's future. I told them that we were a team, and we would rise or fall together. I shared my own struggles, my own journey, and how I got to this point. I encouraged them to speak up, to bring their ideas to the table, and to hold each other accountable. I wasn't just their boss, I was their partner, and together, we were going to make this place something special. The days after the confrontation were some of the toughest I'd experienced. I thought I had a good grip on things, but I quickly learned that change isn't easy, especially when you're dealing with people's egos and established routines. I could feel the tension in the air every time I walked into the diner. The chef was resentful of the way I'd handled the situation. He wasn't used to being called out, let alone being told to treat his staff with more respect. And the waitress? She was unsure about whether she could trust me. She had been treated poorly for so long that the idea of someone standing up for her seemed almost too good to be true, but I couldn't afford to back down. The environment had to change. It had to. This wasn't just about saving the diner. It was about building something bigger. I had started this journey with nothing but a vision, and I was determined not to let a few roadblocks stand in my way. But it wasn't going to be easy. It never is. The first week was a blur of awkward conversations and attempts to patch things up. I would check in with the waitress, asking her how she was doing, making sure she felt supported. I did the same with the rest of the staff. I told them that we were all in this together, that no one was above anyone else, and that the key to success lay in treating each other with respect. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. The chef was reluctant, but over time, he came to understand what I was trying to build. It wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about fostering an environment where people felt valued and empowered. When people feel like they matter, they do better work. And when the people working for you are at their best, the business thrives. But the real test came a few months later, when we hit a rough patch. It felt like everything was falling apart. Despite our efforts, we weren't seeing the growth I had hoped for. Customers weren't flooding in the way I expected, and there was still that sense of stagnation in the air. Our sales weren't terrible, but they weren't good enough to keep the business afloat long term. I found myself working longer hours, trying to figure out what was wrong and why things weren't picking up. I remember sitting in the back office one night, staring at the financials. The numbers were right in front of me, but I couldn't make sense of them. Why weren't we growing faster? What was I missing? That's when I realized I had been focusing too much on the mechanics of the business, the menu, the decor, the marketing, and not enough on the customer experience. We were so focused on improving the inside of the diner that we had forgotten about the outside, the perception people had when they walked through our doors. I realized that I needed to reconnect with the community. I had to remind people why they loved this place in the first place. I had to bring the soul of the diner back to life. It wasn't just about food or service. It was about creating an experience, something that people would remember. So I decided to take a bold step. I launched a community event, a special night where we offered a pay-what-you-want menu. The idea was simple. We would invite people to come in, have a meal, and pay whatever they thought it was worth. The catch was that all the proceeds would go to local charities. It was a gamble. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I knew we had nothing to lose. The night of the event, I stood by the door, watching as the customers poured in. There was a buzz in the air, a feeling of excitement and generosity. The idea was catching on. People were telling their friends, their neighbors. The diners were packed. We had people from all walks of life, young professionals, families, retirees. It was beautiful. It felt like a community coming together, not just for food, but for something bigger. The night was a success beyond our wildest expectations. We raised more money than I had imagined, and most importantly, we had reconnected with the community. We had given them a reason to care, a reason to be part of something meaningful. After that night, I knew we were on the right path. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. People started coming in, not just for the food, but for the experience. It was no longer just a diner. It was a place where people felt welcome, where they felt like they mattered. The real lesson, though, came in the form of my own growth. I had to learn that business wasn't just about profit margins and balance sheets. It was about people. It was about understanding what made them tick, what made them come back for more. I realized that if I truly wanted this business to succeed, I had to put people first, my staff, my customers, and my community. But the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I'll never forget the moment when I realized that running a diner was only the beginning. For the first time, I felt like we had turned a corner, but I knew this wasn't the final destination. We had built something special, a space where the community felt like family, and the food, service, and atmosphere all blended into something uniquely ours. But something inside me told me this wasn't enough. I had bigger plans, and I wasn't going to stop at just this diner. I began to dream beyond the confines of that small kitchen, beyond the humble tables and the regulars who came in for their morning coffee. The diner was doing well, but I wanted to create something that could change lives on a bigger scale. I wanted to make a mark on the world, not just in the food industry, but in every industry I could get my hands on. And so, the real work began. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Expanding meant risks, and with every step I took, I could feel the weight of each decision. I wasn't just investing in businesses. I was investing in people, in communities, and in the future. I had learned valuable lessons from the diner: how to build a brand, how to lead a team, how to connect with customers. But now, it was time to scale. The first step was to replicate the formula that had worked at the diner. I decided to open a second location, but this time I took everything I'd learned from the first diner and applied it in a new way. I wasn't just expanding the brand. I was refining it, making sure every location embodied the same core values: quality, community, and care. But this time, things were different. I was more experienced. I knew what I was doing, and I wasn't afraid to delegate. I started bringing in people who had the same passion for success that I had. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I handpicked leaders who shared my vision. We were a team, and we were unstoppable. As the second location started to gain momentum, I turned my attention to other ventures. I was no longer just a small-time diner owner. I had the confidence, resources, and knowledge to branch out. My next target was real estate. I had always been fascinated by property, how something as simple as land could be transformed into something valuable. I started small, purchasing a few properties, renovating them, and renting them out. At first, it was a challenge. The market was tough, and there were moments when I thought I might lose everything. The margins were thin, and the returns weren't as high as I had hoped. But I didn't give up. I kept learning. I kept tweaking my approach. I started understanding the market better, knowing when to buy, when to hold, and when to sell. Slowly, my real estate investments began to grow. They weren't just about making money. They were about providing quality housing for families, making a difference in communities that needed it most. Meanwhile, the diner continued to grow. Word was spreading. People were telling their friends, and the buzz about our brand grew louder. The second location turned out to be a massive success. People came in, not just because the food was good, but because they felt like they were part of something bigger. They were part of the story. And I knew then that I had accomplished more than just financial success. I had built a community. But that wasn't the end of it. I had big dreams. I wasn't content with just 2 diners or a small real estate portfolio. I wanted to reach more people. I wanted to build a business that spanned industries, that could make a lasting impact on a global scale. And that's when I decided to enter the world of technology. Technology had always fascinated me. I'd been reading about how tech startups were disrupting industries, creating new ways of doing business. I knew I couldn't sit idly by while the world was changing around me. So, I dove in. I started researching startups, reading everything I could about innovation, and reaching out to young entrepreneurs who were making waves in the tech world. I invested in small tech companies, mentoring founders, and helping them scale. I took what I had learned from the diner business, the importance of culture, of customer service, of building something people loved, and applied it to the tech world. Slowly but surely, I started seeing returns. The companies I invested in began to grow, and I started to understand the power of innovation in a way I hadn't before. By this point, I wasn't just a diner owner or a real estate mogul. I was a diversified entrepreneur with investments in technology, real estate, and several other industries. And the more I learned, the more I realized that success in business wasn't just about building one successful venture. It was about creating a portfolio of ventures that supported each other and worked together toward a common goal. The diner was still my foundation, but I had built something much larger, something that could weather any storm. My goal wasn't just to make money. It was to create a legacy, to provide opportunities for others, to inspire those who had once been in my shoes. I knew that as my wealth and influence grew, I had a responsibility to pay it forward. But I also realized that the one thing I couldn't buy was time. The more successful I became, the more I understood the value of my time. I learned to delegate, to trust my team, and to make decisions that weren't just about the next quarter or the next year, but about the next decade. And that's when everything began to click. As I look back on the journey I've taken, I can't help but reflect on the challenges and the growth that came with it. I faced my fair share of doubt, uncertainty, and failure. There were moments when I wondered if this was all worth it. In the early days, when I was just trying to get the diner off the ground, I could feel the weight of every decision. I often thought to myself, what if it doesn't work out? What if I fail and lose everything? The nights were long, and the road was often lonely. I spent countless hours going over numbers, tweaking business plans, strategizing. I tried to find new ways to make the diner stand out, but success didn't come quickly. It felt like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. One of the most difficult times came when I was forced to lay off some of my employees. I knew it was necessary for the health of the business, but it broke my heart. These were people I had worked alongside, people who had become my friends. I didn't just see them as employees, I saw them as partners in this journey. Yet, in order to move forward, I had to make tough choices. It was a turning point for me. It showed me that leadership wasn't just about making decisions, it was about making the right decisions, even when they were painful. The pressure was immense. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. There were no mentors to guide me through these difficult times. I felt the weight of it all. Every decision I made impacted lives, from my employees to my customers to my family. I had to become stronger. But strength doesn't come from just pushing harder. It comes from understanding who you are, why you're doing this, and learning to embrace the challenges that come with success. Through these struggles, I realized that doubt and fear were part of the process. They didn't define me, but they were something I had to face head-on. It was during these times that I started embracing a different kind of leadership, one that was rooted in empathy, understanding, and resilience. I had always thought that success was about achieving goals and hitting milestones, but the deeper I got into my journey, the more I understood that leadership was about something much bigger. It was about how you led your people through those tough moments. It was about having the courage to make difficult decisions, not for your own benefit, but for the good of the whole team. I also began to understand that real growth came from within. I had to learn to trust myself more, to believe in my abilities, and to know that I was capable of making the right choices, even if they weren't the easiest. The lessons I had learned from the diner were applying to every area of my life. As I expanded my investments, I was no longer just looking at the financial return. I was looking at the value I could bring to people. I wanted to leave a positive impact on every venture I was involved in. One of the hardest things for me to grasp was the idea of leadership not being about control. When I first started, I thought I had to manage every detail, every person. I wanted to micromanage everything, believing that if I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done right. But as I grew, I learned the value of delegation and trust. I needed a team that believed in my vision and could carry the load with me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the team. When I handed over responsibilities to my trusted managers and team leaders, it felt like a weight had been lifted. I didn't have to make every decision, and I realized that it wasn't my job to do everything. My job was to inspire, to lead by example, and to create a vision that others could buy into and work toward. Trusting my team allowed them to flourish, and in doing so, it allowed me to focus on the bigger picture. As my empire grew, I began to understand that success is not just about accumulating wealth or achieving fame. True success is about the legacy you leave behind. It's about the impact you make on the lives of the people around you. I didn't want to just build a business empire for myself. I wanted to create something that would outlast me. I wanted to build a legacy that would provide opportunities for generations to come. This is where I started to understand the real value of leadership. It wasn't about power. It was about lifting others up. It was about being the kind of leader who empowered others to find their own success. I realized that success is not a solo journey. It's a journey we take together. And the more people you help, the more successful you become. This was the shift in mindset that propelled me forward. But even with all my success, there were days when I still doubted myself. Even now, I face challenges. But I've learned that those challenges are just part of the journey. They don't define me. How I handle them does. As I look back at how far I've come, I know that my growth as a person has been just as important as my growth as an entrepreneur. The story isn't over, far from it. But I've learned that the key to success is not just about what you achieve, but about how you navigate the road to get there. Leadership isn't just about making the right calls. It's about being there for your people when they need you most. It's about sticking through the hard times and being the light when things seem dark. I'm not done yet. I still have a lot to prove. But what I've learned so far is this. The road to success is long and difficult, but it's worth it. And the true measure of success isn't in the money you make, but in the lives you change along the way. At this point in my journey, I can honestly say that I've built something much bigger than myself. I've created businesses, accumulated wealth, and seen the fruit of years of hard work. But the most important thing I've realized along the way is that success is never really about what you achieve for yourself. It's about what you give back. It's about the legacy you leave behind. When I first started, I was consumed with the idea of achieving success, of proving everyone wrong who thought I couldn't make it. I was driven by a hunger for more money, more recognition, more power. But as I achieved more, I realized that those things weren't fulfilling me the way I thought they would. I remember walking through one of my newly acquired properties one day, seeing the fruits of my labor, the gleaming new kitchens, the renovated spaces, the employees working diligently, but I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I looked out of the window, and in that moment, I realized that I had been focused on the wrong thing. I had been chasing success, but not the kind of success that would truly matter in the long run. True success, I realized, isn't measured in money or status. It's about the impact you make on others, the people you help along the way, the lives you change, and the positive influence you have on the world around you. It's about creating a lasting legacy that outlives your time here on Earth. As my wealth and influence grew, I became more aware of the responsibility I had. I wasn't just a businessman anymore. I was a leader, a mentor, and an inspiration to others. I had to use my success to make a difference. But how? What could I do to ensure that my success wasn't just a personal achievement, but something that would help others long after I was gone? The answer came to me slowly, but it was simple. I needed to pay it forward. I needed to help others reach the same heights I had reached. I needed to create opportunities for people who didn't have the same resources or connections that I had. I knew that success could never be truly fulfilling unless I shared it with others. I started focusing on giving back in ways I hadn't before. I began by investing in young entrepreneurs who reminded me of myself, ambitious, driven, but lacking the resources to take their ideas to the next level. I mentored them, offering advice, guidance, and financial support when I could. I created programs that helped young people learn the skills they needed to succeed in business. I wanted them to have the same opportunities I had, but with fewer obstacles to overcome. I also began to focus on philanthropy in a much deeper way. My businesses started to donate a portion of their profits to causes I cared about: education, healthcare, and poverty alleviation. I didn't want to just be a success story. I wanted to create a ripple effect of change. I wanted to help people who were struggling, just as I once did. One of the most rewarding things I've done was to set up a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Education is the key to unlocking potential, and I knew that by helping someone get an education, I could change the course of their life. It wasn't about just giving money away. It was about creating opportunities for people to break out of the cycle of poverty, to chase their dreams, and to make their mark on the world. In the early days, I was so focused on my own goals that I didn't realize how much of an impact I could have on others. But now, as I look back on my journey, I realize that the most important part of my success isn't the money I've made or the businesses I've built. It's the lives I've touched along the way. And that's when I truly understood what legacy meant. It's not just about what you build in your lifetime. It's about what you leave behind. It's about creating something that will continue to grow long after you're gone. But legacy doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you consciously choose to make a difference. You decide to use your success to help others. You choose to lift others up and create a ripple effect of positive change. I remember a conversation I had with one of my mentees, a young man who had just started his own business. He was struggling, facing the same doubts and fears I had when I was in his shoes. He asked me, "What's the key to success?" I smiled and told him, "The key to success is believing in yourself, but more importantly, helping others believe in themselves. When you help others achieve success, that's when you'll know you've made it." Today, I continue to focus on giving back. I invest in people, in ideas, and in causes that I believe will make the world a better place. I want to leave behind more than just wealth. I want to leave behind a legacy of empowerment, opportunity, and inspiration. As I look back on everything I've accomplished, I realize that the greatest success is not in what you build for yourself, but in what you create for others. I've made my mark, but the true measure of my success will be in how many people I've helped along the way. The road to success isn't easy. It's filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But it's also filled with opportunity, growth, and the chance to make a real difference. And if you keep pushing forward, if you stay true to your vision, and if you remember that success is about more than just money, you'll create something truly lasting. If you're watching this today, I want you to remember this. You are capable of achieving greatness. But true greatness comes when you use your success to help others. When you create opportunities for those who don't have the same resources. And when you build something that will live on long after you're gone. Your legacy starts now, and the future is in your hands. Make it count.